1번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은?
Fans feel for feeling's own sake. They make meanings beyond what seems to be on offer. They build identities and experiences, and make artistic creations of their own to share with others. A person can be an individual fan, feeling an idealized connection with a star. Strong feelings of memory and nostalgia, and engaging in activities, like collecting to develop a sense of self. But, more often, individual experiences are embedded in social contexts, where other people with shared attachments socialize around the object of their affections. Much of the pleasure of fandom comes from being connected to other fans. In their diaries, Bostonians of the 1800s described being part of the crowds at concerts as part of the pleasure of attendance. A compelling argument can be made that what fans love is less the object of their fandom than the attachments to and differentiations from one another that those affections afford.
2번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? 3점.
Psychologists and neuroscientists warn that when we rely on technology to perform tasks, such as navigation for us, our awareness of our physical environment fades as we become immersed instead in an abstract, computerized world. Studies show that we tend to place too much faith in the accuracy of information from computer monitors, and to ignore or discount information from our own eyes and ears. An effect that has caused pilots to crash planes and GPS-following tourists to drive into the sea. A team led by the British neuroscientist Hugo Spears found in 2017 that areas of the brain normally involved in navigation just don't engage when people use GPS. When we have technology telling us which way to go, said Spears, these parts of the brain simply don't respond to the street network. In that sense, our brain has switched off its interest in the streets around us.
3번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은?
Even as mundane a behavior as watching TV may be a way for some people to escape painful self-awareness through distraction. To test this idea, Sofia Moskalenko and Stephen Heine gave participants false feedback about their test performance, and then seated each one in front of a TV set to watch a video as the next part of the study. When the video came on, showing nature scenes with a musical soundtrack, the experimenter exclaimed that this was the wrong video and went supposedly to get the correct one, leaving the participant alone as the video played. The participants who had received failure feedback watched the video much longer than those who thought they had succeeded. The researchers concluded that distraction through television viewing can effectively relieve the discomfort associated with painful failures or mismatches between the self and self-guides. In contrast, successful participants had little wish to be distracted from their self-related thoughts.
4번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? 3점.
Like faces, sometimes movement can fool us into thinking that something has a mind. For example, toys that seem to come alive fascinate children. In my day, one of the popular toys was a piece of finely coiled wire called a slinky. It could appear to walk by stretching and lifting up one end over another down an incline, a bit like an acrobatic caterpillar. The attraction of the slinky on Christmas Day was the lifelike movement it had as it stepped down the stairs before someone trod on it, or twisted the spring and ruined it for good. Toys that appear to be alive are curiosities because they challenge how we think inanimate objects and living things should behave. Many toys today exploit this principle to great effect. But be warned, not all babies enjoy objects that suddenly seem lifelike. This anxiety probably reflects their confusion over the question, is it alive or what? Once babies decide that something is alive, they are inclined to see its movements as purposeful.
5번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? 3점.
In trying to explain how different disciplines attempt to understand autobiographical memory, the literary critic Daniel Albright said, "Psychology is a garden, literature is a wilderness." He meant, I believe, that psychology seeks to make patterns, find regularity, and ultimately impose order on human experience and behavior. Writers, by contrast, dive into the unruly, untamed depths of human experiences. What he said about understanding memory can be extended to our questions about young children's minds. If we psychologists are too bent on identifying the orderly pattern, the regularities of children's minds, we may miss an essential and pervasive characteristic of our topic: the child's more unruly and imaginative ways of talking and thinking. It is not only the developed writer or literary scholar who seems drawn toward a somewhat wild and idiosyncratic way of thinking young children are as well. The psychologist interested in young children may have to venture a little more often into the wilderness in order to get a good picture of how children think.
6번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은?
Through recent decades, academic archaeologists have been urged to conduct their research and excavations according to hypothesis testing procedures. It has been argued that we should construct our general theories, deduce testable propositions, and prove or disprove them against the sampled data. In fact, the application of this scientific method often ran into difficulties. The data have a tendency to lead to unexpected questions, problems, and issues. Thus, archaeologists claiming to follow hypothesis testing procedures found themselves having to create a fiction. In practice, their work and theoretical conclusions partly developed from the data which they had discovered. In other words, they already knew the data when they decided upon an interpretation. But in presenting their work, they rewrote the script, placing the theory first and claiming to have tested it against data which they discovered, as in an experiment under laboratory conditions.
7번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? 3점.
Since human beings are at once both similar and different, they should be treated equally because of both. Such a view, which grounds equality not in human uniformity, but in the interplay of uniformity and difference, builds difference into the very concept of equality, breaks the traditional equation of equality with similarity, and is immune to monist distortion. Once the basis of equality changes, so does its content. Equality involves equal freedom or opportunity to be different, and treating human beings equally requires us to take into account both their similarities and differences. When the latter are not relevant, equality entails uniform or identical treatment. When they are, it requires differential treatment. Equal rights do not mean identical rights, for individuals with different cultural backgrounds and needs might require different rights to enjoy equality in respect of whatever happens to be the content of their rights. Equality involves not just rejection of irrelevant differences, as is commonly argued, but also full recognition of legitimate and relevant ones.
8번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은?
Choosing similar friends can have a rationale. Assessing the survivability of an environment can be risky if an environment turns out to be deadly, for instance. It might be too late by the time you found out. So humans have evolved the desire to associate with similar individuals as a way to perform this function efficiently. This is especially useful to a species that lives in so many different sorts of environments. However, the carrying capacity of a given environment places a limit on this strategy. If resources are very limited, the individuals who live in a particular place cannot all do the exact same thing. For example, if there are few trees, people cannot all live in tree houses. Or if mangoes are in short supply, people cannot all live solely on a diet of mangoes. A rational strategy would therefore sometimes be to avoid similar members of one species.
9번. 다음 빈칸에 들어갈 말로 가장 적절한 것은? 3점.
Thanks to newly developed neuroimaging technology, we now have access to the specific brain changes that occur during learning. Even though all of our brains contain the same basic structures, our neural networks are as unique as our fingerprints. The latest developmental neuroscience research has shown that the brain is much more malleable throughout life than previously assumed. It develops in response to its own processes, to its immediate and distant environments, and to its past and current situations. The brain seeks to create meaning through establishing or refining existing neural networks. When we learn a new fact or skill, our neurons communicate to form networks of connected information. Using this knowledge or skill results in structural changes to allow similar future impulses to travel more quickly and efficiently than others. High-activity synaptic connections are stabilized and strengthened, while connections with relatively low use are weakened and eventually pruned. In this way, our brains are sculpted by our own history of experiences.